Chapter 41 Training Days 3 You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. After his brief encounter with Annalise, Lothar returned to Victoria's residence without anyone noticing his little escape. Then, he used the rest of the day to practice his two already learned techniques, focusing on gaining more attribute points and improving his proficiency in them. A technique might have a low rating, but that was only its first limitation. However, because the majority of people in this world struggled to pass even the beginner phase, even an iron-grade technique could become impressive in the hands of a genius who mastered it at the grandmaster level. Another critical point was its user's cultivation level. The greater its power, the greater the technique's effectiveness. With this in mind, Lothar did not take his training lightly, even considering how standard his techniques were. He hoped to increase his intelligence attribute in the future, so aiming for high levels of mastery in each technique was not too high a goal for him. As such, he wanted to be different from the rest, doing something that few could or even attempted, becoming a grandmaster. After sunset in Peter's City, Lothar finally finished his last training session of the day, lying face up in the small training area of his wife's residence. There he was, breathing heavily, while he seemed to be melting due to the impressive amount of sweat pouring from his body. Such a thing could be easily noticed even if someone looking at that place ignored his body. That was because the entire wooden floor of that area was stained with traces of wet feet and sweat drops. But while he was in that state, a small puddle of black goo was standing beside him, from which drops of this disgusting substance continued to accumulate as it dripped from his navel. He had finally reached the third transformation. And already knowing what that meant, Lothar did not even need to see the system screen in front of him to smile in satisfaction, feeling the pleasure of leveling up. Finally, trying to regain his breath and ignore that strange smell in his surroundings, the young man dressed only in a small pair of shorts turned his attention back to the system screen. In this instant, he finally understood a little more of this. Name: Lothar Ritter, Physique. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, Bloodline. Cultivation. Level 3, STR, 4.0, Con. 4.8, Dex. 4.1, AGI. 6.2, Int. 30, Per. 11, Will. 40.7, Level 3, HA. By my count, Level 3 should be cultivation with average physical attributes above 4. Let's see what the average value of my attributes will be the next time I advance. He pondered silently, feeling that he could begin to predict the values needed to level up. With that, he could understand more of the strength of people more substantial than him, something precious to anyone. But as he thought about he looked straight at his attributes and remembered the warnings during his 4 training sessions today. He realized that his speed of progress had already slowed. Sigh. There must be some kind of body resistance related to this kind of training. I've only trained a few hours on each of these techniques, but my progress has already slowed by an average of about 25%. That's alarming. At this rate, in a few weeks with these techniques, I won't have any attribute gain anymore. His eyes opened wide at the thought of this possibility. But that was the life of cultivators. Beginners like Lothar usually had impressive results in their first training. But, then, their results dropped considerably after weeks or months. And since many lacked the willpower and talent to keep persevering, they would never find out how to retrieve their gains. However, Lothar did not feel too desperate about this since he could always count on his physique's advantages. So, even if training these techniques would no longer help him increase his level, it would still be something worthwhile for him, as long as he could advance his mastery and rely on his incredible physique powers. After learning a little more about cultivation in this world, Lothar cleaned up that area and then took a cold shower in Victoria's bathroom. However, as he was leaving that place in the same way he usually did in his room, this young man ran into his wife, who by now had returned from her responsibilities. She was sitting in an armchair beside her bed, slowly taking off her shoes, while her slender calf was on display to Lothar. But as he looked at his beautiful wife, she finally saw him wearing only a towel around his waist. Victoria watched him for a moment, feeling a little angry at this shameless person. Still, then she noticed the improvements in his body. This guy. He's getting stronger. She noticed the volume of Lowther's chest and shoulders, while his abdomen seemed much more defined than before. And seeing that such an idea was not in her head, she stood up to approach him, curious. What have you been doing? Are you training your body or something like that? Hearing that, Lowther smiled and said. I'm exercising lately, but it's no big deal. Why? Are you feeling more attracted to your spouse? Tisk. This idiot. He's probably not doing anything. That must be related to the miraculous recoveries he's been through recently. She watched him dress inconspicuously, assessing his figure. After Lowther finished putting on his clothes, Elise arrived at that residence bringing the two of them dinner. Aren't you eating with your parents today? The silver-haired young man asked this as he sat down at the only dining table there was around. Noticing her husband watching her, Victoria was honest. No. They are busy with something. Oh. And while the two of them were talking, Elise was staring at Lowther with a terrible expression in her eyes, incredulous at seeing this scumbag so well. Damn. Is he immortal or something? How did he survive the night before and still recover so well? Hell, he looks better than ever. She admits how well Lowther was looking, something seen in his muscles and his skin's sheer quality. And thinking about how much better it would be for her if this young man just disappeared, Elise felt terrible seeing him looking so good. Damn it. I have to think of something to deal with this scumbag. She thought about that as she watched the two eating, mainly looking at the young man who seemed to have the appetite of a wild animal. Wow, this food is delicious. Lowther complimented the dish he was devouring. This place has good cooks, huh? Really? Victoria laughed as she looked at Elise. Of course. By the way, dear, can you cook? But then Victoria's expression went cold at hearing such words. Why should I? For me, of course. My wife has to be able to satisfy me in E. He smiled at her as he made a gesture with his right hand, trailing toward one of her hands. Humph. The day I cook for you is the day hell itself will freeze over. BL.net, then I already feel bad for the poor demons. They will freeze very soon. He joked one last time before finally smelling Victoria's hand as his face was slapped. Pa. That's your punishment for saying so much nonsense in such a short time. Victoria looked at him coldly before finally giving him another warning. By the way, you will sleep on that couch tonight. She pointed to that piece of furniture. So don't even think about going anywhere near my bed tonight, understand? In the blink of an eye, the night passed. After sleeping on a couch in Victoria's residence, Lowther secretly left that place after her departure, heading toward his goal. As soon as he managed to leave the area of the Frost estate, he immediately headed towards the central part of Peters City, where the local cultivation house was located. Chapter 42 Training Days for You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Upon arriving in front of a building that looked like a golden pyramid trunk, Lowther did not waste much time enjoying the surroundings and soon entered the local cultivation house. Like the innumerable scroll store, this place was an institution with a presence in many cities throughout the empire and was one of Leopoldine's great organizations. Not only did this place offer cultivation rooms for rogue cultivators, but it also had services for outsourced work, such as escort missions and similar things. At the same time, there were some establishments related to spiritual cultivation in that place, such as a store for pills and alchemical potions, items often used by customers of places like this. However, when entering the entrance hall of that post, Lowther did not pay attention to any of these options available in the cultivation house. No, since his funds were only dwindling recently, Lowther was interested in just getting on with his training to avoid running out of coins for future opportunities. He could even spend everything he had on cultivation products to try to raise his level quickly. But since he did not yet know precisely how cultivation resources worked, doing something like this would be a mistake. Thus, sticking to the basics and continuing with his plan seemed to him to be a better idea than risking everything on strange things. At the same time, he did not feel ready to undertake missions or jobs that might pay him good money. So, he really could not pursue all the options on his path. With this in mind, he quickly arrived at the main service counter of the place, where half a dozen people were serving at the moment. All these people attending were beautiful women dressed in matching dresses, which showed how healthy they were. And seeing one of them getting free, Lothar soon approached her in search of information. "Hello, this is my first time in this place, so I want to know how to get a good training room." Hearing the voice of the most handsome man she had seen in her entire life, that attendant smiled and took a brief moment to respond to Lothar. "Well, I am happy to be able to attend to you on your first time in the cultivation house. I hope I can satisfy your questions about this place." She ran one of her hands through her hair, looking intensely at Lothar. "The training rooms of our institution are available in 3 ways. First, if you are part of one of the large organizations in the empire, you naturally only need to pay the basic fee for the cultivation room you want. Second, if you are a member of our institution, you can pay smaller amounts regarding the fee of the cultivation rooms depending on your rank. Third, you can simply skip these requirements by paying the fee for the cultivation room you desire." Upon hearing this, Lothar continued to stand in front of that woman, his arms crossed at chest height. "How much is that fee?" "For cultivation rooms for mortal warriors, the cost for 12 hours is 1,000 bronze coins." She said to him, assuming that he was probably in search of this room. She was not a cultivator. But considering how youth and inexperienced Lothar seemed to be, she had readily assumed he was a first-stage cultivator. 1,000 coins. Lothar showed no surprise, but in his heart, he was shocked. 1,000 bronze coins for only 12 hours. How many days would someone like him need to work to get that many coins? Hell, even peak cultivators of the first stage usually did not make much more than 100,000 bronze coins per year of work. But here in this place, they were charging that for just 50 days' rent for the cheapest type of cultivation room. Spiritual cultivation is truly expensive. No wonder it's so hard for ordinary people to raise their level. He then asked, "I've heard that the cultivation house doesn't require loyalty. Is that true? I'm interested in joining your ranks if it is." She smiled at him and said, "Yes, indeed we are. Here you only need to be loyal to what you commit to. But in other situations, we never demand help from our members. We don't charge our members anything beyond what is promised when they do missions and other things. On the other hand, we give various advantages to members of the cultivation house." "Is that so? Tell me a little bit about it. If you look in that direction." She pointed her right hand to someplace. "You will find the information station in this building. There, our members can get information of different ranks depending on their position in the ranking of our agents. At the same time, you can meet high-ranking people and even trade with them if so you are qualified. We also have exclusive auctions, partnerships with local stores, and more. As for the previous cultivation room, someone new to our organization only pays 50% of the normal amount. But that amount can decrease and even reach 0 depending on your position in the cultivation house." She said in an excited tone. "I see." Lothar muttered in a low voice, interested in this initial discount. "What do I need to join the cultivation house?" "You need to be at least a 5th transformation cultivator since we don't have missions for people of cultivation lower than that. In addition to that requirement, we will, of course, do the necessary physical tests and an examination to prove that you are not an enemy spy. If there are no problems, your application can be confirmed within a week." "A week, huh?" He sighed as he realized he had no alternatives but to pay more per hour. "It doesn't seem to be difficult to join this organization, but I can only wait for now. By the way, I want to know if I have to use my real identity when I join this organization. Can I keep my identity secret?" Yes. In fact, many of our members are quite famous for their deeds, but few truly know their names and origin. She laughed, finding it funny that such a striking-looking person would think to hide his identity. With such looks, even if I have seen tens of thousands of faces in my life, I will never forget your appearance. She appraised him once more, thinking he would not be able to hide, at least from her. Very good, Lothar commented before finally moving on with his plans there. Then, for the time being, I'll rent a cultivation room for first-stage cultivators. Ah. What about your application? She asked in surprise. I'll do that later. Oh. All right, then. After that, they completed the transaction, with Lothar leaving 1,000 coins behind in exchange for the key to one of the many cultivation rooms in this building. After going up to the second floor, Lothar walked down a long corridor until he reached a door with the number 217 engraved on it, the same as the access key he had obtained. With that, he quickly unlocked the room and went inside, curious to know what the notorious cultivation rooms were like. However, upon entering that place, Lothar found nothing exceptional but rather a place of about 20 square meters, almost entirely empty. In fact, there were only 3 things in that place. One was what looked like a ceiling air conditioner like the ones from his former life. Another was what looked like a wooden dummy, and finally, a small cube that stood precisely in the middle of the place. But as he entered, Lothar unconsciously looked at the door that was already closed at the moment and saw some hints on how to use this place. Good thing they put this here. He sighed in his heart. And upon reading that, it did not take him long to understand that the object on the ceiling was actually an object containing a spatial formation for the best use of the spiritual energy within that room. On the other hand, the dummy was a puppet that also had formations on its body, which was helpful to use in training. As for the small cube, that was a small simulator that used an illusory formation that enabled its users to have any kind of mental training they wished. Oh. That seems useful for me to increase my understanding regarding those techniques. He realized this, finally preparing to begin his training. Chapter 43 Finally back. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After some time in that cultivation room, Lothar was sitting cross-legged on a cultivation cushion, with his eyes closed. However, he was not cultivating but instead experiencing the illusion created by the small cube while training his understanding of the art of tearing down trees. Within that mental illusion, this young man was in the middle of a large forest, where thousands of trees formed a seemingly endless sea of green leaves. Yet, while the area he was in was quite interesting to see and explore, Lothar was not interested in wasting time there. No, this place had cost him dearly, and he did not want to waste a second in this cultivation room. Consequently, he was already using a long axe against a tree in front of him, constantly striking at that thick trunk. There, he stood with his legs spaced away from each other, his knees slightly bent, and his feet turned in different directions. At the same time, he was holding the big axe with both hands, making movements that were slowly changing. At first, his body position had been different from now, when he had practically started to attack that tree without any preparation. But as he reached his target, he slowly found the best attacking positions, improving his posture and offensive movements. But even though he had already evolved quite a bit in the last few minutes, he was still slowly learning about the unique behavior of an axe in his hands. Weapons like these had centers of gravity far away from the hands. So, the force he had to make to play with such an artifact was not small, and every movement was a challenge for him. On the other hand, weapons of this type failed concerning attack speed, consequently, the attacks made by axe users needed to be highly effective. Not only was it ideal that he finished his enemy with as few blows as possible, but he also had to be creative with his attacks. Otherwise, a living, moving opponent could have a significant advantage after one mistake on his part. With the experience he gained from attacking that tree's trunk, Lothar was evolving his understanding of the art of tearing down trees. A few hours later. Art of tearing down trees, rank. Iron, mastery level. Beginner, effect. Plus 5% STR. Finally, the system message appeared in front of Lothar, making this young man stop his illusory training for a moment and return his attention to that cultivation room. Opening his eyes, he continued to see the same screen as before. He found it interesting that even within an illusion, the system worked precisely as in the real world. In any case, it did not take him long to realize that, unlike his training in the real world, something like this in an illusion did not increase his attributes. But this was to be expected. After all, that small cube was made to train the understanding regarding techniques of its users, not to train the body. Typical training had that characteristic due to the constant use of the user's body, but just studying the technique itself would not do that. As such, he gained no benefit beyond learning the basics of that technique. On the other hand, the mental attributes had different workings compared to the physical ones. Therefore, even illusory training could not stimulate his intelligence and perception. As for his will, it could be stimulated by such a thing. But since physical pain played an essential role in stimulating this characteristic, the gains from training with that were far less than what he could get from regular training. So, his results were not remarkable in this respect. However, Lothar was pleased to be able to master the basics of that technique without having to leave the city. What's more, even if he had to cut down trees to advance it, he could still train the strokes of the technique without having to do so. That would not bring him advances in understanding. Still, he could improve his physical characteristics through training with a real axe. With this in mind, he was quick to summon the axe in his spatial ring, ready to face the puppet in that room. Not only could this help him improve his attributes, but it would also give him real fighting experience. Thus, he soon activated that puppet, selecting a lower strength level than his, but prepared to increase the difficulty as he got used to the experience. Ha! Ha! Wow! Lothar finally fell to his knees on the floor, utterly sweaty after fighting for almost 5 hours against the puppet in his cultivation room. In that time, he had been able to advance his combat abilities to the point where he had mastered the fundamentals of what he had learned in the previous illusion in order to face the puppet, with a power comparable to that of a third transformation cultivator. But that had been his limit for now, which in itself had made him suffer a lot in the last few hours, but also taught him about how decisive he needs to be when using an axe. Anyway, while he was breathing hurriedly, this young man saw the last of the warnings regarding the improvements in his characteristics. Plus 0.1 in all physical attributes. Plus 0.1 in DX. Plus 0.1 in WL. Plus 0.1 in CON. Plus 0.2 in STR. Name: Lothar Ritter, Physique. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, Bloodline. Cultivation. Level 3, STR, 4.3, Con. 5, Dex. 4.3, AGI. 6.3, Int. 30, Per. 11, Will. 40.8, as he smiled and saw his status, Lothar saw the timekeeper in that room coming up on his last few minutes that he had the right to stay there. Even though there was still time for him to train for a little longer, since he did not think he would get any more attribute points, he simply ended his training today. He still had to return to Victoria's residence before that woman returned, so he decided to use the remaining minutes to clean himself up and go home. Ah, that was a good training day. He smiled satisfyingly. I'll come here again tomorrow before returning to my routine at the Morning Star Academy on Monday. He would like to use this place more often, but he did not have the funds to come here daily. But on the other hand, even if he wanted to enroll in this institution, he could only wait for the time being because his level was still too low. Hence, he was determined to come to this place tomorrow and perhaps on weekends in the future. But, other than that, he was aware that his focus should be on the academy. Therefore, it was not long before he returned home for the meal and rest that he so desired at the moment. As he finished dressing Monday morning, Lothar checked his status one more time before heading towards Annaliese's carriage. Name: Lothar Ritter, B9 Com, Physique. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Bloodline. Cultivation. Level 3, STR 5.5, Con. 5.6, Dex. 5.0, AGI. 6.8, Int. 30, Per. 11, Will. 41.2, after seeing this and feeling a slight increase in his confidence, he got into the carriage of his beautiful sister. Law, who was still feeling awkward as she stood face to face with him. Good morning, Anna. Morning. She replied in a low voice as she avoided eye contact with the young man in front of her. How was your weekend? Your family has already freed you from your punishment, right? He asked as he jumped up from his seat and stood side by side with her. Yes, I can now return to my usual routine. Well, I don't like the idea of you having to be punished because of me. He placed one of his hands on top of one of hers, looking into the brown eyes of that beauty. She ignored that and simply asked about his weekend. Did you go to the cultivation house? How was your experience? Yes, I went. He smiled. I had a good time in that place. But I don't want to talk too much about it. In the future, you will see the results of my training, hee. He looked out of the window of that carriage, excited to return to the academy. Today, I will talk to those 3 individuals. His eyes sharpened as he felt his hands scratching for revenge on the people who beat him. Chapter 44 Losers. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After living for a few days in the cultivation world, the Earthling Lothar gradually felt changes in certain parts of himself that he had never experienced in his previous life. It was nothing significant until then, but after he began to feel the pleasure of getting stronger, this young man began to feel excited about the idea of fights and the like. It was as if, little by little, his blood was heating up while a desire for domination surged in the depths of his soul. And with that, his fighting intent was higher than ever. But this was not only because of the previous beating. No, even after that, his will to fight was not so different from what he would feel if he were on Earth. The worst happened just after these 3 days of training when he, for hours, fought with a smile on his face against the previous puppet. And thinking about the 3 people who had attacked him earlier, this young man could not help but wonder what it would feel like to leave his enemies in the same state they had left him. Hell, he had even dreamed about it the night before. But all this was not a pure coincidence or something hidden from the Earthling Lothar's personality. No, such a thing was part of spiritual cultivation, the path to power, something that went far beyond just longing to live longer. Many began cultivating because they hoped to live longer and earn more money. However, spiritual energy was like an addictive drug. The stronger someone was, the more that person craved power. And in such a competitive world, power was obtained through domination, which stimulated every cultivator's competitive side. This obviously influenced different people in different ways. But it remarkably affected those with a strong mentality and those aware of what power meant. Lothar did not know it, but he was already beginning to experience these side effects. After saying goodbye to Anneliese, Lothar headed towards the amphitheater where he had his geopolitics class. When he arrived there, he immediately looked in the direction of a beautiful red-headed woman, who did not seem to be in a good mood today. But even though she was not in her best state, that beauty was still the most graceful of the dozens of women in that area. Why are you so serious, Elka? Maybe you missed me on Friday. He asked with a smile on his face as he stopped facing her. Hearing that tone of voice loaded with confidence, Elka took her eyes off the book in her left hand and looked at him with a slightly more satisfying look. Lothar. Why didn't you come Friday? Elka wanted to get up to hug him. Still, as she remembered where she was, she restrained herself before showing the whole class her relationship with Lothar. Lothar smiled as he saw her meaningful look just before sitting down beside her. That day, I had a little trouble and had to miss the academy. But don't worry, I will soon compensate you for my absence. He brought his face closer to her left ear and said softly. I know you must have been longing to see me. Gulp. She looked at him in silence, realizing that he seemed to understand her desires very well. Am I that obvious? In any case, we must be careful about where we do our things. He winked at her as he smiled discreetly. That makes sense. She once again thought about how to get a place in the academy dorm, something that could make things tremendously easier for them. He said before that he couldn't get a place in the dorm, but I definitely can. I'll tell my family that I need a private place to rest while I'm here. So, I should be able to get that in a few days. She smiled but said nothing to Lothar so she could surprise him later. But as the two stood there talking in low voices, with flirtatious looks on their faces, suddenly a group of half a dozen young people stopped in front of them. All of these people appeared to be under the age of 15, brats in Lothar's view. However, as much as this young man did not give a damn about the children of this class, he soon noticed the black-haired young man who was his target leading this group. The black-haired young man then looked at Lothar with an expression of disgust and anger on his face and said, "Lothar Ritter, I challenge you to a duel." After this was said, the voices in the surroundings quickly diminished, as Elke and Lothar finally lost their good humor from before to look at that person. "And who are you?" Lothar asked calmly, looking at the black-haired young man as if he had never seen such a person. "What? He doesn't know the young master. That bastard can only be trying to piss us off." That young man's minions brandished in fury as they demonstrated their willingness to smash Lothar's face. But that person was determined to personally humiliate Lothar, preferably in front of Elke, just to get rid of the hatred in his heart. "Tisk. My name is Alrik Bayer." The black-haired young man said this as he looked coldly at Lothar, confident that he could handle this jerk now that he had advanced to second transformation. "I never thought that the good for nothing of the Frost family would join our academy. Furthermore, he would flirt with other women even though he is married to the first Miss Frost." Alrik said this with a smile, throwing the truth about Lothar in Elke's face so that such a woman would wake up and stop her game with him. Alrik did not understand what was wrong with Elke for her to be attracted to trash like Lothar. But if she were so weak that she could not choose with whom she hung out, he would do it for her. "We will be engaged soon, so I have to take the reins of the relationship right away." He pondered this, thinking about the conversations that were occurring between his Bayer family and House Becker. With that in mind, he threw the truth about Lothar in that woman's face, wanting to humiliate Lothar in a fight for the whole class to see how he would smash this poor fellow's face. And upon hearing Alrik's comment, Elke looked doubtfully at Lothar, in disbelief that this was the good for nothing son in law of the Frost family. It can't be. Lothar is such a confident and intelligent person. That is false. She bit her lower lip and rose from her chair. "Alrik, stop bothering us. Lothar has just entered the academy, and you want to challenge him. What is your real purpose here?" She yelled at that person while Lothar remained in his chair, watching her with interest. "Elke, this is between me and that incompetent. Lothar, don't tell me you're going to chicken out and stand on a woman's wings. Don't tell me you're such a pussy," he said for the whole class to hear, mocking Lothar's honor. But upon hearing that, Lothar was not bothered at all. "Looks like it was truly you, huh?" And noticing that young man's casual glances at Elke, it was not hard for the silver-haired man to understand it all. "Hee, looks like you're a loser who saw the girl you like being dominated by another, huh? Pathetic. But I won't fight you on your terms. That would only show my strength to the whole academy and create reasonable justification for your family to act against me openly." So he thought about it as he listened to Elke defending him. "I would rather take my revenge on you in my own way when I find it most convenient. Lothar, fight me. If you lose, you will swear that never come near Elke again. I am not interested in your suggestion." Then, Lothar commented something. "I have no interest in a pathetic little show from a desperate person. I loathe people of your kind." Upon hearing Lothar's calm words, each of those young men in Auric's group looked at him with a desire to strangle him. It seems there are only losers in this class. Lothar smiled at them as he stood. But as they stood in that tense position for a few moments, Elke finally lost her patience and said, "If you want to fight someone, then I will do it in his place, Auric. Lothar is my friend, and I will not let you threaten him so freely." Chapter 45 Resolving the Conflict. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Upon hearing Elke's nonsense, Auric was about to grab this woman's wrist to get her out of his way when suddenly Lothar stopped him. "What do you think you are doing?" He asked this as he pushed that unpleasant fellow away from Elke. Lothar did not yet know how to sense other people's cultivation. But even though he did not know that Elke was no match for Auric, Victoria's husband would not allow another man to touch his woman. Yes, his woman. He and Elke had no feelings for each other and were not doing anything incredibly intimate. But Lothar was a selfish man who did not accept the idea of sharing his women. Even in a casual relationship, he would not allow another man to touch the woman he was with. Even more, considering that fellow did not seem to care about hurting Elke, something Lothar found highly unacceptable. Humph. For a worm who hides behind a woman, you kind of have some attitude, trash. Auric angrily commented with an arrogant look on his face, glaring at the man in front of Elke. Well. Do you accept my challenge? Of course not, Lothar said as he turned to Elke and took one of her hands as if preparing to leave that place. Then what is your problem? Are you going to allow her to fight in your place, coward? Auric shouted for everyone in that amphitheater to hear him as his face turned red. I don't know if your parents let you hit your head when you were minor, but you should seek help, loser. Lothar looked back and said this. Your opinion doesn't matter to me. I don't need to fight with you, and Elke doesn't need to do anything either. Who do you think you are? Lothar laughed and shook his head. Tisk. A mere brat has no right to speak such absurdities. What? You miserable, son of a... Auric was about to explode in hatred when suddenly Professor Koch entered that place. What's going on here? She shouted as she saw the crowd surrounding Lothar and Elke. At the same time, there was significant tension in the air. But upon realizing this, rather than getting more involved in this situation, Lothar simply pulled Elke into his arms, leading her out of that amphitheater. In the meantime, the rest of the room, including Auric, lost sight of those two as they were distracted by that teacher. Damn it! The wretch escaped without my noticing. Auric cursed Lothar in his mind but did nothing. Now that Annika had already directed her attention to him, Auric had no choice but to endure that woman's sermon. As for this woman, she showed all her unhappiness at seeing these people disrupting her class, but she was also interested in what she had just seen. This Lothar. He's definitely not the useless guy everyone thinks he is. She thought about it as she remembered how he had left that place unnoticed by the other students. However, she, a sixth transformation cultivator, could not be fooled by his movement technique. Anyway, it looks like he escaped a good scolding. She laughed in her heart, remembering the rules of this place and Lothar's situation. The Morning Star Academy naturally allowed fights between students since this was an extremely competitive place. However, there were rules about how this could happen. And among the prohibitions, students were not allowed to disrupt classes because of personal disputes. So, Annika was interested in how Lothar had escaped this problem, dodging possible penalties. Next time I see him, I will try to understand why he is hiding. Meanwhile, Lothar and Elke had finally reached the end of an empty corridor, where there was no sign of people for dozens of meters. Lothar. Elke looked at him in surprise, thinking how fast he was moving as he carried her in his arms. You are not someone without cultivation. Her eyes widened as she thought of her experience at his side days ago. How could he be? Someone with green talent has great potential for the standard of our province. Then why is he hiding? Why is he in Sector .1? Questions began to arise chaotically in her confused mind as she felt him still holding her in his arms. Elka, let's talk. He finally said something just before putting her back down. After seeing the serious look on his face, Elka's eyes twitched, and she asked in an unsure tone. Lothar. What Alrik said. Is that true? Yes, it is true. She opened her mouth momentarily and then closed it as her eyes reddened. How can that be? Then why are you acting intimate with me? Are you just playing with me? No, Elka, I'm not playing with you. He moved closer to her, slowly pressing her against a wall. I won't go into details, but Victoria has not forbidden me to be with other women. So, unless you have a problem with being with a committed man, there won't be any problem regarding her. And just so you know, I want to be with you. Gulp. How can you say something like that? Of course, I don't want to be with another woman's man. What future would I have by doing that? You would have me. He touched one of her cheeks, feeling the tears streaming from her eyes. Lothar might have thought there was no feeling between them, but this woman was already beginning to fall in love with him. Considering this, upon discovering the terrible truth about this man, she could not help but feel an ache in her heart. Would I have you? She was surprised by his unusual response. Yes, you would have me. He touched his lips against hers and felt her involuntary responses mixed with her reluctance. But as she felt this young man's grip, it was not long before Elka gave into his arms, kissing him even more intensely than at other times. As she felt the heat of her body rise, the redhead began to talk about this relationship. Lothar, I don't think we should do that, besides, you are already committed. My family will never give me to you, you are asking too much of me, don't worry about those details, Elka. I'll take care of everything, he commented amidst their kisses. You just need to follow your instincts and know I will make it happen. I'll give you exactly what you need, but she closed her eyes as she felt Lothar playing with her ears and neck. I don't know if I can accept sharing you with others, I'll make it worth your while, Elka, plus, if you were my woman, I'd probably spend more time with you than with Victoria, is that so? She looked at him more seriously, feeling happy to hear that. But while waiting for an answer from him, she suddenly felt one of his hands touching a particular part of her body. Ah! What are you? Shoo! Stay calm. I'll make you relax a little. Just give me a minute. Lothar smiled at her before returning to kissing and playing with his hands. Ha! Ha! What was that? After a little over a minute, Elka gasped as she felt a sensation hard to forget in her body. And while leaning on Lothar's arms due to the weakness in her legs, she felt even more confused at this instant. Her body genuinely wanted to continue the relationship with him. Still, her mind told her there would only be trouble ahead of them. But as she felt her gaze clouded by the doubts in her heart, she heard his voice. Trust me. I will solve any problem that comes along. I know the problems I may have because of this, but I am reassured about the future. You can stay that way too. He held one of her hands and looked into her eyes intensely. And don't worry about that person. I'll deal with him later. So, he won't get in our way. Elka was surprised to see how willing he was to get into trouble just for her, someone with ordinary talent and beauty inferior to Victoria's. Are you sure you want to do this? She asked. Once we walk further, there may be no turning back. He just smiled at her, indicating that there was no doubt in his mind. Elka then sighed in relief and accepted this madness. All right, I want to keep getting to know you. Chapter 46 Perception. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Good. Lothar smiled and hugged Elka's thin waist just before letting go of her and asking. By the way, can you tell me where I can buy a mask? A mask. She readily realized that he was thinking. Do you want to do something against Alrik? I think he deserves a lesson for his boldness. Lothar gave no details about his previous incident, which he was almost sure had been caused by Alric. Lothar, he's already at the second transformation. So you'd better be careful. Second transformation, huh? He was surprised to hear that, but that was nothing to him. The difference between second and third transformation was not slight, so such a person should not be a problem even considering offensive items and combat techniques. On the other hand, his advance had been much higher than his opponent's, so he had the surprise factor on his side. Don't worry. He's no big deal to me. She thought about how he had moved earlier and did not doubt his words. But you can't exaggerate either. He is the son of the patriarch of the Bayer family. It won't be good to make that family angry about it. Don't worry. I won't do anything crazy. Besides, I have a feeling they won't recognize me. He laughed. Oh. All right, then. You don't have to go anywhere. I can give you a mask. She took something from her storage item and handed it to Lothar. Seeing that porcelain item in her hands, Lothar accepted it, promptly storing it in his own spatial ring. Come on. Let's find something to do while the geopolitics class goes on. He said this after noticing that the strength in Elka's legs had returned. And upon hearing Lothar, that woman readily agreed with him, following him toward one of the cafeterias in Sector .1 as her heart beat hurriedly. Elka could not believe she was following such a dangerous path, but the thrill in her heart made it worthwhile. Not only that, the idea of being with Lothar was getting more and more attractive to her, little by little putting a smile on her face. He seems so different from the rumors. Maybe someone has ruined his reputation on purpose. I can't believe someone like that was called a good .4. Nothing. Sometime later, Lothar and Elka said their goodbyes as each of them went on to settle their affairs at this academy. In Lothar's case, he found Anneliese to talk more about cultivation, finally asking that woman how cultivators sensed the cultivation of others. Lothar had never worried about this in his few days in this world. However, noticing that Alric had grown stronger without him even realizing it had worried him a bit. Alric was no big deal, but there could be dangerous people in his way in the future. Therefore, this young man did not want to be in the dark when something like this happened again. And in talking about it with Anneliese, he discovered that sensing an opponent's cultivation level was not as easy as one might imagine. The spiritual energy of cultivators, in a sense, was like a type of radiation. However, there were ways to contain this radiation, which basically prevented other individuals from noticing such a thing. That could be done through special cultivation techniques, unique artifacts, exceptional physiques, or even certain cultivators' abilities regarding spiritual manipulation. With this, if a particular cultivator had fulfilled any of these requirements, hiding one's cultivation from those of the same cultivation stage was not so difficult. In this situation, only at specific times, such as the middle of a fight, during cultivation, or when the cultivator himself let his aura be released, could his cultivation be easily accessed. As for how to do this, well, it was simply through something called spiritual sense, a kind of cultivator's sixth sense. That was similar to an innate ability of cultivators that grew stronger and developed as the cultivator's level increased. After finding out about this, Lothar left his sister in Law and went to a green area of that academy, where he found a quiet place to sit and meditate. He did not cultivate spiritual energy like other people in this world. Still, since even the physique depended on spiritual power to function, he was sure he had spiritual energy in his body. And with that, he should also be able to use that ability. With that in mind, he had begun to meditate in that quiet area, trying to sense the surroundings without opening his eyes. After trying to do this for a while, Lothar finally felt a strange sensation, as if suddenly the darkness had taken on many colorful outlines and shapes. He still had his eyes closed, but it felt as if colored clouds surrounded his body, while the world looked like a sea of this stuff. Is that spiritual energy? He wondered in surprise. And just as he thought he had succeeded in using his spiritual sense, he tried to scan the people in his surroundings. Incredible. So that's how it is. Immediately after that, the system gave signs of life. Name. Cultivation. Level 1, STR 1.7, Con. 2.2, Dex. 2.1, AGI. 1.9, Lothar saw the stats of one of the people he had looked at when he opened his eyes, someone he did not know. Wow. So the system can do something like that too. He smiled since that was undoubtedly a rather important ability. After all, he could precisely see his opponent's strengths and weaknesses. But he soon put that aside when more system messages appeared in front of him. Plus 0.5 in PR. Oh. His eyes widened. So perception is not only related to vision but all the skills related to the senses. Then I should be able to evolve this attribute as I train spiritual sense. Very good. Now I am prepared to face those people. He stood up, determined to pursue the three people who had beaten him. He was only highly suspicious of one of them since only Alric had shown his feelings the most. But this Lothar was sure that the black-haired fellow would reveal his associates or minions involved in the trouble. So, he quickly went on his way in search of those people. In the blink of an eye, a few hours had passed. At this moment, the Morning Star Academy students were already returning to their homes or the local accommodation. Amidst the departure of these many students, Anneliese was already returning home unaccompanied by Lothar, already knowing he would not return with her. Lothar had obviously warned her that he had something to take care of, so she would not wait for him in vain. Hence, Lothar had followed in the footsteps of the black-haired young man, who had not returned to his home but had gone along with two other youths to the local suburbs. When he noticed the strange path those three took, Lothar found it suspicious, but since it did not go against his plans, he just continued secretly pursuing them. He wanted to teach that cheeky fellow a good lesson, so going to the distant regions of this city was not exactly a bad thing. And by doing that for a few minutes, it was not long before the trio stopped next to two children, shouting arrogantly at them. "You miserable bastards! You sold us wrong information last time, so get ready to pay for that." A tall, muscular young man said this angrily, prepared to take action against the two brats at any moment. "Tisk! You must be mistaken. Our network is the best in the city. But if the information was not the most accurate, it means that your target is cautious and knows how to hide information even from his shadow. Don't blame us for this person's efficiency." One of the two said this while showing a confident front, even though he was just an ordinary mortal. "There's no way we're the problem." "Humph. Say what you want. We will take our coins back or end your lives," Alric said in a harsh tone, still feeling the fury of Lothar's words. Chapter 47 Revenge. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Upon hearing Alric's threatening words, the two youths, who could not even be 14 years old, felt pressured, but they also did not want to have to give their coins. If they did this here, there was a risk that in the future, they would not be able to keep their earnings because customers would always try things like this when they did not get the best results. When this happened, it would be the end of their business, or maybe even their lives. After all, weakness could lead to abuse, and abuse would lead to more drastic situations, with the violence, of course. With that in mind, they could not back down in the face of those three. "If you will act against us, be prepared to deal with the consequences of pissing off the entire Mouse Company." The one who looked more muscular said this, trying to sound confident. "Mouse Company, huh?" Alric said with a contemptuous smile on his face. "What can you guys do to me, the young master of the Bayer family? I think that even if I get rid of you here and now, your little group would not care, and maybe your leaders would come and ask for my forgiveness. Huh, young master, let's finish these idiots off in one fell swoop." The tall, muscular young man said this while was already holding a wooden stick in his hands. Oh. And Lothar promptly noticed that item that had caused him countless seconds of pain. So that wretch was one of the three who attacked me. Very good. I can deal with those brats in one go. A smile appeared beneath the mask Lothar was wearing as he watched those people from afar. He did not feel ready to act yet because it seemed more interesting to let those people cause more trouble in that area. Lothar was not listening to the conversation of those 5 individuals. Still, because of the bodily disposition of each of them, he felt that things were not developing well. And thinking that it would be interesting to let the 2 sides fight so that he could perhaps use such a thing to his advantage, he just continued to watch them in silence. If they fight, there will be one more suspect to what I will do with them later. An even more satisfied smile formed on Lothar's face. As this silver-haired man watched the situation, Ulrich's group acted against the 2 youths, quickly beating them, something easy for them due to the difference in strength between the parties. As they watched the convulsing bodies of those 2 youths, now full of wounds on their bodies, Ulrich's 2 minions collected the items around the bodies of their targets. Tisk! Those damn rats had hardly any coins with them. The one who seemed the weakest of the 3 said this angrily. Looks like they know how to guard their resources. The young man with the stick in his hand said thoughtfully. That must be why no one has come to protect them. Humph. But more important than getting my coins back, we teach these bastards a lesson, Ulrich said as he looked with contempt at the bloodied face of one of those 2. That's what happens when you challenge me. Ah. But just as he was getting ready to kick that individual's head in, Ulrich turned on his back, realizing that someone else was in the vicinity. Who are you? He asked in an authoritative tone, looking in the direction of a masked person wearing a large black overcoat. Name. Ulrich Bayer, Cultivation. Level 2, STR, 2.8, Con. 2.0, Dex. 2.1, AGI. 2.4, Lothar looked at the stats of his primary target while thinking about how to deal with these people. He could use his newly learned attack technique, but this could turn into a massacre, something he wanted to avoid. He did not want to leave several mutilated bodies in that place. No, he wanted to teach those 3 a lesson that would get them a few months off the streets. With that, he could not use the axe. I think I'll get that stick for myself. He looked in the direction of the tall, muscular young man. The stick was not a weapon he had trained in. Still, as he thought about it, Lothar judged that if he used such a thing as his axe, he could cause his opponents quite a bit of pain without putting them at risk. Name. Cultivation. Level 1, STR, 2.2, Con. 1.8, Dex. 2.1, AGI. 1.4, after realizing the strengths and weaknesses of that target, Lothar ignored Ulrich's earlier question and made his first move. Crosswalk. In that instant, he activated his movement technique, crossing the 15 meters separating him from his targets until he reached the back of that tall, muscular young man. Lothar had more than 4 times the agility and nearly 3 times the constitution of such a person. So, Ulrich's minion did not even notice his enemy approaching his back. Look out! Ulrich shouted in surprise when he noticed one of the hands of that mysterious opponent stealing the wooden stick from his minion without any resistance. But it was already too late for that minion. Once he felt his weapon disappearing from his hands, his eyes opened wide, and he saw the shadow on his back. Pow! The tall, muscular young man was kicked hard in one of his knees by Lothar, beginning to cry out in pain. At the same time, he fell to the ground and felt that part of his body in an unnatural position. Bastard! Ulrich's other minion shouted in hatred as he saw the result of a single attack from this mysterious enemy, feeling how vicious such a person was. He wanted to screw with my knee earlier, so it's only fair to let him feel some of his own medicine. Lothar had no regrets about kicking his target's knee while feeling incredible for fighting here. But as Ulrich looked at the situation, he suddenly turned pale, examining in terror the enemy in front of him. That's a cultivator of at least 3rd transformation. His back shivered as he thought the worst. The strength used earlier by Lothar was definitely more significant than that of someone at the second transformation. Therefore, Auric already knew that his opponent had the power of at least third transformation. However, since he felt nothing of his enemy's cultivation, he was starting to get nervous about having to face someone even more substantial than that. Damn it! I'll have to run. He made up his mind before turning and started running away, abandoning his two minions. After seeing that, Lothar wasted no time. He looked at the other minion who was next to him and leaped into the air. He then spun his body in a direction that directed much of his strength in one of his feet against his opponent's arms. Both of that young man's thin arms immediately fractured at several different points, with him flying backward until he fell onto the ground, bawling in pain. Then, Lothar again used his movement technique to stop Auric's escape. Damn it! Bastard! Do you know who I am? You dare to touch the Bayer family heir? Auric said amidst his agitated breathing, appealing to the only thing that could save him at the moment. Unfortunately for him, his opponent was not the type to be intimidated by mere words. Is that so? Lothar finally said something, but due to the mask on his face, his voice was muffled enough for that young man to recognize him. Well, let me tell you something. Your family is not here. I'll make sure you never forget that. Finally, Lothar reached Auric and spun the stick in the air until he attacked his target in the direction of his enemy's groin. Oh, no. Auric shuddered in fear as he realized where Lothar's attack was heading, already with tears in his eyes. Crack. A thunderous cry of desperation came from that young man's throat, startling even the two already highly injured young men. That's for trying to hurt me the other day. Lothar kept that stick on Auric's groin, pressing hard on such a thing. After that, he used the stick again, this time to hit that young man in the shins. That's for trying to interfere in my relationship with Elka. Pow. That's for thinking about my woman. Pow. Finally, after several blows, Lothar had hit both of Auric's arms and legs and finished smashing what was in the groin of such an opponent. In the midst of this, Auric fainted in pain, as did his minions, who had fainted even earlier due to the terror of having seen Lothar doing such cruelty to their leader. However, when he was finished with that person, Lothar did not forgive those two. Instead, he made a point of beating them some more, making sure that each of them became even worse than he was after that beating a few days ago. Chapter 48 A Little Leisure, A Little Distress. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After finishing those three people, Lothar wasted no time and ran from that area, using his movement technique to move away from there. He had not taken anything from those people since he was not a criminal who robbed his opponents. But, on the other hand, there was always the risk of stolen items being traced, so doing such a thing did not seem attractive to him. Hence, besides taking revenge on those people, Lothar accomplished nothing else on that occasion, having just left the 3 and the 2 children from before lying in that area. After this, he changed his clothes before arriving in a busier part of the city and also put away the mask he had received from Elka earlier. Wow! That was truly amazing. He smiled as he returned home, feeling a sense of gratification throughout his being. Is this how cultivators feel when dealing with weaker people? Magnificent. He looked down at his hands, feeling his strength. No wonder that fellow tried to challenge me earlier. He advanced and was overconfident about defeating me in front of the students in Sector Point 1. A smile then formed on his lips. Unfortunately, his opponent was me, he. While thinking about the recent events, Lothar passed in front of the central square of this city, a very well organized and brightly lit place where people usually strolled at this time of night. Several of the province's best restaurants and upscale stores were located there, establishments that stayed open late into the night. And while these services were the most used in this place, there were people there who were just walking or having fun in the open air, near the central statue of this city. In the middle of that square was a 10-meter-high statue, made entirely of a super-strong metal alloy, which guaranteed the durability of this historical monument made in honor of the founder of this city. Such an individual had created this place more than 30,000 years ago, at a time before the current dynasty. And even considering the political change, his statue remained there, and his last name became the name of the city where Lothar now lived. But this was not surprising. According to the legends, such a person had been an origin saint in his time, someone that even members of the Leopoldine dynasty dared not offend. And seeing the statue of that individual, Lothar could not help but click his tongue, imagining the stories of this cultivation world, of the adventures such a person must have experienced. Origin saint, huh? There must be no one else of that level here in Peter's city. Why has the home of someone like that changed so much? He wondered as he looked in the direction of that statue. But as he smelled the fragrance of meat coming from one of the kiosks in that area, Lothar put that matter aside, feeling his mouth salivate. "Buddy, how much is the portion?" he asked as he reached the side of one of the attendants in that place. 10 bronze coins per serving. You can choose the type of meat you want and one more side dish. The man, who looked to be about 30 years old, said this as he pointed to the extensive menu on one of the walls of that place. 10 bronze coins. What a robbery. Lothar's eyes widened as he looked at that individual. This amount of coins was not much, but considering that he ate 5 meals a day and did not even work, paying such an amount for a single meal seemed like a lot. However, his stomach was already rumbling, and being in that place, Lothar shook his hands and waved to the guy, indicating for him to prepare a portion. Some time later, one of the servants of House Bayer, who was responsible for driving Ulrich's carriage, finally met the young man. Earlier Ulrich's group had followed separately to their meeting with the 2 young members of the Mouse Company. After all, they intended to do things they should not do in that place and, as such, had left such a person waiting for them at the academy. But after more than 2 hours of waiting for them, this man had begun to sense that something was wrong and followed the tracks of his young master and those 2 friends of Ulrich. In this way, he had reached that isolated place where 5 injured bodies were lying in the middle of the same street Lothar had acted earlier. Young master. This middle-aged man, black and white hair, a little overweight, shouted as he ran toward the bloodied Ulrich. As he came closer to that young man, the servant soon realized the extreme condition of Ulrich's body, which, as much as it was not at risk, was bruised to a worrying extent. How could this have happened? How did the young master end up in this state? His eyes fluttered in disbelief as he looked at Ulrich with pity. He then once again observed the 2 children in that place and soon recognized them. Those are members of the Mouse Company. What did the young master want here? No, that doesn't matter now. The most important thing is that the young master was injured in this place while he was with these people. I must find out if the Mouse Company dared to act against the young master. He made up his mind just before taking the 5 bodies in that place to Ulrich's carriage. For the moment, he could not delay in taking Ulrich back to the Bayer estate. Still, he would soon begin to investigate this matter. With this in mind, this person could not leave anyone behind. Some more time later, the patriarch of the Bayer family finally left his son's room with a livid expression on his face, full of anger at what had happened. How dare anyone do this to my son? He shouted for everyone in his residence to hear him, as looks of hatred spread throughout that place. Ulrich's mother, who at the moment had tears in her eyes, ignored her husband's fit of rage and looked thoughtfully at the family doctor. Dr. Straub, isn't there anything you can do for my son? We cannot accept this loss, she said, looking out the door of Ulrich's room from where she was picturing the scene she saw earlier. Her son's groin had been so brutalized that Ulrich's 2 precious jewels had been completely crushed. At the same time, his little friend, who had once looked healthy and growing bigger and bigger, now looked like a dented hose, full of bruises. Thinking about how this could affect her only son's future, that woman could not help but question that doctor about the future of Ulrich's manhood. Sigh. An old man with a mustache and long white hair sighed deeply, expressing his regret in his expression. Madam Bayer, my abilities are limited, so I cannot say for certain the young master's future. But as far as I am concerned, I am sorry to inform you, but I cannot imagine the young master fully recovering from this loss. I believe he may regain some of his manhood with time. But only the future can tell us whether he will be fertile or even able to fulfill his responsibilities as a man. I believe that even the coroner Klausner would be unable to do anything in this situation. He commented in a low voice, quoting the best doctor in the province. That. Ulrich's mother shuddered upon hearing that. Beove, that can't be. Ulrich's aunt, who was also there, shouted angrily, finding it unacceptable that her nephew would meet such a tragic fate. There must be something we can do. But Dr. Straub did not know what to say to these people. Whoever did this, such a person has certainly destroyed this young man's future. There is no way his body can fully recover from something like that. He pondered silently, thinking that if Ulrich was younger, such a thing could be reversed. But since that individual was already nearing his biological maturity, there was not much his body could do. Well, at least he can recover from his other injuries without affecting his talent. He sighed, remembering that there were men in this world who did not involve themselves in certain worldly matters. We can't leave little Ulrich like that. That is unacceptable. How will the young master continue the family lineage like that? Ah, what a tragedy. Several comments arose in that area as the Bayer patriarch boiled with anger. Ah! I will kill whoever did that. Such an individual shouted with all his might, looking in the direction of his son. Adler! Adler! Go investigate that matter alongside Servant Lanzo. I want you to bring me the person responsible for this incident as soon as possible. He gave his orders to one of his subordinates there. Chapter 49 Province Conference. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sometime later, Lothar entered his room with a peaceful look on his face, wishing he could lie in his bed and sleep until the next day. After his full recovery and resolution of the situation with Anneliese, Victoria had allowed him to return to this room. She had no interest in keeping him in her residence for too long. So, this man was back in his humble room, where he barely had space to train. But since it was already late at night, Lothar was not interested in training today, even more so considering the exercise he had just done. With this in mind, right after changing his clothes, he lay down on his bed and closed his eyes. Pa! But as trouble always comes at the worst of times, just as he was about to fall asleep, his door was slammed by someone. Hell! Who knocks on other people's doors in the middle of the night? He asked aloud, making an angry expression as he looked at his door. Lothar, it's me. Open the door. Victoria said in a low voice, but enough for him to hear her perfectly well. Tisk. After that, he opened his door as his eyes squinted in the brightness of that hallway, trying to observe the beauty dressed in an elegant blue outfit. Victoria, what do you want now? Couldn't this wait until dawn? Victoria then ignored his inelegant questions and entered that room uninvited. She sat on one end of his bed and said, My parents wanted to have dinner with you earlier, but I couldn't find you. Where were you? Lothar ignored her question and asked her what the problem was. What do your parents want from me? Is your mother not satisfied with annoying me once a week, by any chance? Does she want to increase the frequency of our meetings? Tisk. Don't you dare say that again. She stood up from where she was, looking at him warily. If anyone hears you saying that, you won't even need strangers to beat you up. She will come here to finish you off. But Lothar did not show any regret. Instead, he closed his eyes and smiled at the beauty holding one of his arms. So. Why are you here? Have you gotten used to sleeping in the same room as your husband and couldn't stand the longing? You have a vivid imagination. She laughed, knowing that getting angry at his comments would not solve the situation. But that's okay. You kept dreaming about it. In the meantime, I came here to warn you about a problem. Lowther's eyes widened upon hearing this, with him finally coming out of his sleepy state to look at her meaningfully. He then listened. In a month, we will have the province conference, a meeting of the local powers that takes place every 20 years. The province conference was actually a competition between the local powers that could guarantee advantages based on the final ranking of the organizations participating in the event. Among these advantages were the right to vacancies in the Morning Star Academy, the exploration of mining and agricultural areas, and even the privilege regarding certain taxes levied by the imperial family. The local academy was a competitive place, where many people entered through its rigorous selection process. However, noble organizations always had more people with qualifications to enter that institution than there were places offered through selections. As such, gaining a good placement in the province conference could guarantee a more significant number of a given family's talents entering that institution. On the other hand, even though families had their territories, the entire empire belonged to the Leopoldine family. Each noble house just took care of smaller parts of that vast state for that power. At the end of the day, each noble family had to pay taxes and report possible developments to the imperial family, who could make demands and collect taxes at any time. Of course, this did not happen according to the emperor's every wish. After all, taking everything from his vassals, demanding more than should, or coveting certain items too much was the formula for rebellions. But even though there were laws that provided that families could stay away from imperial punishments, there were ways for this state's rulers to distribute more or less power to those organizations. Among them was the administration of some exceptional regions, which were granted to the organizations that demonstrated the best performance in the conferences of their respective provinces. Because of these and other minor advantages, families like Victoria's valued such an event highly. Victoria looked significantly at the man in front of her and said, "We thought you wouldn't have to participate in this before, so I never said anything to you. But as we tried to register our members without your presence, we were barred by other local families." Lowther understood what she was about to tell him and felt a headache. "We didn't have anything to do. The competition is simply too important to risk our participation. So get ready to accompany us to this event in the next few weeks." He pressed his jaw hard and faced that woman face to face. "And how am I supposed to participate in this competition? Are there mortals in this? Will I have to fight, or are there different tests regarding that?" Lowther already knew what the province conference was, since the primary content of his geopolitics classes was precisely about Lin province. But he did not know how the final ranking of that competition was determined. Sigh. "It's hard to say. That could vary. But in any case, even if you have to fight, just give up after you get on stage. It's not like it will make any difference anyway." She looked away as she said that. "Good," Lowther commented without showing his discomfort at having to hear such words. She watched him for a moment, finally realizing something Anneliese had told her earlier. "Is there something else?" he asked as he realized that she did not seem intent on leaving. "What were you doing to have been so late? In fact, these past 2 days, you have not stayed at my residence as you had promised. So, what have you been doing?" Upon hearing such questioning, Lowther simply walked to his bed and lay down, intending to sleep. "If you have nothing more to say, close the door after you leave." He looked at her already lying on that bed, and laughed. "Of course, if you want to join me, I won't mind." Lowther did not like this woman's questioning, which made it seem as if he owed her something, as if he was her subordinate. But in his view, accepting this behavior from her by answering her questions was like encouraging her to continue behaving this way. Thus, instead of being honest with her, he preferred to keep silent so as not to encourage her to continue with this approach. Lowther. Victoria walked over to his bedside and watched him intensely, wanting to teach him some good manners. But seeing his relaxed expression, of one who was about to fall asleep, she clasped her hands tightly and left that place in a hurry, indignant that he did not obey her. "That bastard! How can he behave like that? Before he acted as if he was ready to answer me anything I asked. But now. I have to do something. She muttered as she entered her residence, heading towards her training place to release some frustration from dealing with that uncontrollable man. He needs to return to my control. Otherwise, this will only get worse. And while Victoria was thinking of ways to get Lothar in line, he was already sleeping peacefully in his room, dreaming of what he would do to Elke in the future. Chapter 50 Choosing an Academy Mission. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Another day began in Peter's City, where Lothar was already arriving at the academy alongside Anneliese. He had spent a great night's sleep in his room and woke up early for another day in this place, satisfied that he had gotten rid of 3 problems the night before. In addition, now that Lothar had his first taste of actual combat, he was eager to begin his climb to the top of the Morning Star Academy's ranking. He had already thought that at some point, he should start doing the missions issued by that institution. Still, previously he had been busy doing other things. Not only had he been building up strength to protect himself, but he had also spent several hours learning about the cultivation world, specifically the Lin province. Even though he had a practically endless study path ahead of him, he believed he was already minimally capable of experiencing a bit more of this world. So today, Lothar intended to stop by the Sector Point 1 mission hall, where he finally wanted to choose a mission to carry out in the coming days. Saying goodbye to Anneliese, Lothar followed the path Elke showed him previously to the area where the mission hall was. But as he was walking through that area, he suddenly found Annika in his path, who was heading towards her responsibilities at the moment. And seeing that bold man waving at her, Professor Koch remembered what she had seen the day before and decided to approach Lothar to answer some of her curiosities. "Lothar, what are you doing in this place? Isn't it time for you to be in one of your classes?" That woman dressed in a beautiful set of blue and black clothes asked this as she walked side by side with him, not showing any more intimacy than she should have. "Oh. Anne, you care about me far more than I thought. I wonder if you've fallen in love." "Tisk. You brat, why don't you just answer me?" She looked at him unhappily but managed to avoid any more meaningful reaction. "In fact, why are you hiding underneath the farce of a good for nothing? Don't try to fool me with your nonsense this time. I clearly saw you using a technique yesterday." After hearing that, Lothar looked more carefully at Annika but continued walking toward his destination. After a while in silence, he said to her, "It is not right to say that I was hiding before. What is right is that I am doing it now." "What? What do you mean by that?" Her expression changed after those words were spoken. Not only had she not understood, but she had also been surprised at the answer he had given her. Annika had expected some lie or that he would simply ignore her. But suddenly, he had told her that, without showing any sign that he was lying. And indeed, Lothar had no reason to lie or try to deceive this woman. After all, Annika had seen him in action. Whether he wanted to or not, she could already spoil his plans if she so chose. Well, unless there is a way to hide the results of tests done by large noble families, then there would be no way for me to hide. She gave him a strange look, understanding that there were no ways to cheat aptitude tests in this world. Even the strongest cultivators could not do this, as specific cultivation rules were independent of how influential someone was or their talents. Nevertheless, once an aptitude test was taken, there would always be some result. That could be the specific result, indicating the characteristics of the cultivator tested. Or it could be an abnormal phenomenon caused by the divergence in the quality of the apparatus used and the characteristics of the individual tested. In any case, there was always some signal, so Annika knew Lothar couldn't hide from such tests. As for now, why simply go out announcing to the world your good fortune when you can keep it to yourself? Lothar had his lofty goals, to put himself in a position that would be looked up to by many in one way or another. But he did not do this out of simple interest in attracting others' attention but for the sake of the benefits of power. Since he was too far from achieving anything relevant to be eye-catching, there was no reason for him to reveal himself to other people. Is that right? She stopped walking in the middle of the mission hall, causing him also to stop. And how did you get this good fortune? I don't know. Why don't you tell me? He opens his arms, looking at her with a smile on his face. As the two stood there in that position, the people in the surrounding area were already watching them strangely, as it looked as if Lothar was about to hug the beautiful Professor Koch. Hey, are you seeing this? Of course. Do you think I'm blind? So, there seems to be something strange between those two. Yes, they don't seem to recognize where they are. Sigh. Did it have to be Professor Koch? Ah, another lost beauty. Comments appeared in the surroundings as Annika's calm face gained a slight blush since she was listening to several of these comments very well. This Lothar. Is he doing this on purpose? Does he want to embarrass me to stop me from asking my questions? She bit her lower lip, feeling cowed by this man who had only been at this academy for a week. Tisk. We'll continue our conversation another day, Student Ritter. After that, she quickly walked away from that area, letting that man turn his way back to where he could find the missions. Knowing how this place worked because of Elka's advice, Lothar quickly went to a large mural with several posters with missions. In this mission hall, as in the other sectors of this institution, any student could choose the missions of his level from the options available on the mission board of his sector. Thus, if such a student had the minimum qualifications necessary to do a particular mission, the mission hall administration responsible for the mission would authorize this. They would pass on the responsibility of the mission to the student or group of students that wanted to commit to it, making a slight adjustment to the ID of such people. So, students could try their luck doing these missions, which of course, had to be proven when they were done, or possible benefits related to them would not be paid. Knowing the limitations of this place, Lothar could not help but sigh for a moment since he could not take missions much above the level of a Sector Point 1 student. That was because Sector Point 1 missions were naturally meant to challenge the people in this sector. But, on the other hand, for someone who wanted to attempt more complex missions, such an individual would have to move up a sector, something challenging to do in a short time. That was because, in order to move from one sector to the next, a student needed to pass several tests, among them the completion of 10 successful missions in the past 12 months. Even if he had the necessary knowledge to move up a sector, which he did not, Lothar would be unable to do missions of other sectors of this academy. But this man understood why this was so. This was a place of education first and foremost. As such, it was to be expected that the missions of this academy would not be given to just anyone, or some of the more ambitious students would die in droves. With that in mind, Lothar soon began to read the title of the posters in front of him. Training Mission. Bodyguard Mission. Medicinal Collector Mission. Human Guinea Pig. Debt Collector. Specialized Accessory. He muttered to himself, realizing that there were all sorts of missions, even those that seemed unrelated to spiritual cultivation. At the same time, the prizes promised for those missions were around 200.400 bronze coins and 40 merit points. But some possibilities provided extra prizes, as in the case of someone who helped collect medicines and could earn part of their harvest. Realizing the possibilities in front of him, Lothar spent some time thinking about what to choose until one of those missions stood out to him.